Now I'm really excited to share with you how to sell lots of books with podcast interviews. This is a special presentation for those who invested in the directory of podcast interviews. Get ready because I'm going to share with you some very specific strategies that will help you to definitely sell more books. It's a fact. Authors rarely sustain themselves on their writing alone. You have to think in terms of multiple sources of income. A lot of authors think, well, if I have one good book, if I'm a Stephen King, if I'm a J.K. Rowling, if I'm one of those authors that gets discovered, everything will take care of itself. The reality is, for 99.999% of authors, you have to have other ways to sustain yourself than just the book. And you also have to have a way for people to find out about not only you, your books, and the other products and services that you offer. And that's what this presentation is all about. Multiple sources of income would include books, speaking engagements, consulting, coaching, events, masterminds, online products. It's a fact. Your job is to gain as much visibility for what you do as possible. Don't expect fame to fall from the heavens. I was watching a podcast interview the other day. Actually, it was a YouTube video where Oprah was interviewing Lady Gaga. And they were talking about how people often say, oh, I would give anything to be doing what you're doing. And Oprah said, no, actually, you wouldn't. Because a lot of people think that our fame just came to us. And if they knew how much work went into it, they probably wouldn't say that they would give anything to have the fame and fortune that we have. The reality is that you have to work for your passion. You have to have discipline for your passion. And part of the discipline is getting as much visibility as possible. And it's a fact that podcast interviews expose you to hundreds, sometimes even thousands of potential readers per episode. And the shelf life can't be beat. I have a client that got on one podcast show where within 48 hours, there were over 45,000 downloads. 45,000. Now, here's the thing. Just because people download, just because they listen to your interview, just because they become a fan of yours, doesn't mean they're going to buy your book. What it means is you're on track to do other shows and gain that name recognition. Because the fact is that oftentimes somebody has to hear an expert, has to hear an author several times before they actually invest in their books, their products, and their services. So you want to get on as many podcast shows as possible, but you always have to start with that first one. If you have a book you want to gain lots of visibility for, podcast interviews can't be beat. Podcast interviews, by far, hands down, are the best way to gain visibility. I've been doing a lot of book marketing over the last 15 to 20 years, and out of everything that I've done, I would say that podcast interviews, even more so than having your own show, but podcast interviews are definitely one of the best ways to get your message out to market in the fastest way possible. Now, many people are touting the benefits of starting your own show, but the reality is very different than the fantasy. What I mean by that is it's great to have your own show, and I do have my own show. It's called Power Up for Profits, and I'll show you what that show looks like. There's Power Up for Profits podcast show. I have Power Up for Profits website. I have the Marketing Mindset website. I have Plant-Based Eating for Health. I've got a YouTube channel. I've got a lot of stuff going on. And I'll tell you that it does take a lot of work to have your own show, because not only do you have to record the show, you have to edit the show. You have to have the background music. You have to have the intro, the extra. You have to find experts to be on your show if you're going to be interviewing people. You have to market the show. So there's a lot more to running your own show than most people realize. When you're on somebody else's show, you simply show up, you do a great interview, and then on the back end, promote the episode. What you'll find is the more that you help to promote the episodes that you're on, the more the hosts are going to appreciate it, and it's more likely that they're going to invite you back. So rather than thinking in terms of starting your own show and believing the people that give a lot of hype around, oh, it's really easy, all you have to do is get up on iTunes and get up on Spotify and the rest takes care of itself. That's like telling authors all you have to do is put your book on Amazon and the rest takes care of itself. I'm here to tell you it doesn't. In order to sell books, in order to be seen, you have to market, period, end of story. And that's what this video is all about. I'm teaching you some strategies on how you can get lots of visibility so you can sell those books. To start a show, let's just look at what it takes to start a show. There's time involved and it's extensive. There's finding guests and quality guests at that. Earlier today, I actually got a call from somebody who wanted me to be on a guest on her show, and she was really excited and tell me about what you do. And she was building rapport and getting really excited. She goes, and there's a fee to this. And I said, there's a fee for me to go on your show? The reality is you shouldn't have to pay most of the time to be on a show. Now, in some cases, it might be worth it, but in most cases, you should not have to pay, nor should you expect your guests to pay to be on your show. Some people use that as a business model, and bless them. But I don't believe in paying to be on shows, not at this point in time. And I stopped her mid-sentence and I said, I need you to stop right there because I'm not going to pay to be on your show. I have plenty of opportunity. I know how to go out and get shows. And actually, the directory that you got, I would highly recommend that you access the information in there because it's going to save you a lot of time and a lot of effort by just going right into the directory, finding shows that fit your expertise, your niche, your market, and approaching the host that way. Now, I'm going to give you some tips on what you need to do in order to be considered for a show. With my show, I have people approach me and they say, I'd like to be a guest on your show, and they give me no reason why I should have them be on my show. They don't listen to an episode. They don't even know what my show is about. They come with an idea for a topic that has nothing to do with the type of show that I operate. And so you really want to make sure either side of the microphone that there's a match for what you're doing. But to start your own show, you would have to find guests. You would have to have a platform for hosting. I happen to use Libsyn. That's L-I-B-Y, Libsyn, L-I-B-S-Y-N. And that's the platform for hosting. And that basically you upload your episodes and it feeds it out to iTunes, Spotify, and to many different platforms. You also need the equipment. You need a microphone, which you're going to need that as a guest too. And I recommend that you get a good microphone. You can tell the sound of my microphone is good. Now, let me give you a little example. If I wasn't sitting right near the microphone, if I was off at a distance, obviously it sounds a lot different. So you want to make sure you have the right equipment. You will either have to do the editing yourself or you have to pay someone to do the editing. Then you have to do promotions. If you have a distribution list, you have an opt-in subscriber list, you would promote it to them, maybe a blog post on social media. Wherever you can put the word out, you want to promote your show. And that's why when you tell a host that you'll promote the episode for them, it actually plays in your favor. And then you may need a support team because there are some technical sides to running a show that maybe you're not fully equipped to handle. Maybe you don't have the time. With a lot of experts, just because they have the time doesn't mean that they should be using their time that way. Now, let's look at why podcast shows, why they're such a good idea. First of all, you get a lot of visibility with podcast shows, and it takes more than one show to get you the kind of visibility that you probably want. There's really good market reach, and there are shows for virtually any type of topic that you can think of. If your topic and your expertise is about spirituality, there are plenty of shows for that, health and fitness, dog training, relationships, leadership, team building. There are shows for just about anything. It's a great way to fast track your success. So podcast shows really give you the opportunity to get your message out there in a big way. There's very low marketing cost if you're a featured expert. And again, you really shouldn't have to pay to be on shows. I know one host that was charging $5 for people to be on her show, and that would offset some of the costs, but in a way that kind of devalued the experience. And then I've heard of people charging as much as $1,000 to $2,000. And you really have to justify that kind of an investment. There are plenty of opportunities to be on shows without paying. So keep that in mind as you go out and look for an opportunity. It's a great way to showcase your expertise and your book or books, as the case may be. Often being on a podcast show leads listeners heading right over to Amazon to buy your book. So if you're an author and you're talking about a book that you've written and you make reference to that book and you read out of the book while you're actually being interviewed, many times people, while they're listening to you, will click right over to Amazon and buy your book. And so it's a great way to increase your sales on Amazon. Now, not everybody's going to do that, but even if you get 1 to 3% of the listeners, and like the woman who had 45,000 people who downloaded within a 2-day period, even a 1% conversion on that would come out to 450 people buying her book. That's pretty phenomenal. It's a great way for raising awareness about your books. Without a doubt, a podcast show is a phenomenal way to raise awareness. There are a lot of authors who are very well known, who got well known directly as a result of being on podcast shows. And if you can hold a conversation, you can shine. It's really that simple. Now, more reasons why. Podcast interviews give authors an incredible platform to position your expertise. I have one client who is a fuel expert. She's a gasoline expert and on minimizing our use of gasoline. What better opportunity than to be talking to people while they're in their car, on their way to work, in drive time traffic, and talking about ways that they can cut their fuel usage. It's a perfect platform for somebody like her. Podcast shows are on the increase. Without a doubt, they're going up rather than down. It's right now one of the hottest platforms that you can use to get your message out to market. Hosts are constantly on the lookout for engaging guests. So the main thing you want to keep in mind is be yourself. Don't try to be somebody else. Don't try to be perfect. I know some people never get started because they want to be perfect and they're afraid of making a mistake. Trust me, you will make mistakes. And that's part of your personality. The audience for podcasts is skyrocketing and shows no signs of stopping. Mainstream podcasts are still young enough to be accessible without the need for a huge team. So you being on podcast shows, there's not a lot that you have to do other than schedule in time to do your research, to look for shows that you're a good fit for, to make sure that they have guests on the show. And in the podcast directory program, there's a lot of great information that teaches you more about how to get on shows. So I highly encourage you, dig into the directory and dig into all the other training material. It's a very cost-effective way to market yourself and your books with an extremely high ROI, return on investment. Podcasts are on the increase. I want to show you some statistics here. According to an article from Edison Research, 94% of podcast listeners are active on social media, compared to the national average of 81%. So podcast listeners, because a podcast is part of social media, they're very active on places like Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. And so in knowing that, as you market yourself, you want to make sure that you're marketing on the other social platforms. 52% of podcast listeners follow brands or companies on social media. So if people like you and they hear you on a lot of podcast shows, they're probably going to start following you and your book and your message on YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram. So be aware that it's not just about getting on podcast shows, but it's truly about building a community and building a following. Podcast listeners tend to have more disposable income. And podcast users' obsession with social media make them an incredibly valuable, highly sought after target audience possessing incredible raving fan potential. And the truth is, raving fans buy books. The economics of podcasts, according to SmartAsset, 20% of mid-roll podcast listeners have household incomes of $100,000 or more. Midroll is the leading podcast advertising network connecting companies and brands with some of the most beloved and respected names in podcasting. 62% of podcast listeners have incomes of $50,000 or more. So these are people that have disposable income. So if you map things out correctly and you get a lot of visibility on podcasts, and your website and your blog and all your social media is what I call visitor ready. When people go there, they're able to access maybe a free ebook, maybe a report, maybe a checklist, maybe a training video. You get them on your subscriber list, and then you start engaging them. And this is the thing about being on podcast shows. Don't just go out there and work in a vacuum. Really think through, where do you want to drive people? What's your main objective? What are you trying to accomplish? And based on that, then make sure that your foundation is in place, because listeners have money and they want to spend their money. Why not spend it on you if they are a good fit for your products, services, and your books? 58% of listeners have a BA. Now, some of the mistakes that people make in trying to find podcast shows, not being prepared. So you reach out to a host and the host says, oh yeah, I want you on my show. And you have nothing prepared. You don't have an expert sheet. You don't have an introduction. You don't have a headshot you can send them. None of this material is ready. You need to be prepared. I had an opportunity just today. Somebody saw me on Facebook and they asked me, they know that I do animal rescue. I have rescue dogs at home. I have a rescue cat. I have rescue chickens. I have rescue horses. And so they have a show to do with dogs. And they said, would you be a guest on my show? Within 5 minutes, I had everything that they needed in their inbox. I just sent it right out. I said, what is it you need? I scheduled my call. I sent them the information. Bada boom, bada boom. We're all done. I didn't make them wait. And this is really important, that you be really clear on the fact that you can't make them wait. No media information. You don't have a pitch sheet, and that's PITCH, a pitch sheet. You have no intro. You don't have a media page on your website. That is a recommendation that I make, and you'll see that through the training material with the directory. You definitely want to have a media page on your website. Right there, no media page on site. Inexperienced at interviews. The only way that you get experience is to get experience. So start right now to get opportunities. And you can let a host know that you're fairly new to this. You don't need to pretend like you know what you're doing if you really don't. Something that can be rather charming and endearing for a host is for you to say, I'm pretty new at this, but I'm so passionate about my message. I have one client who is in her late 60s. She's got a phenomenal message to do with women in the Catholic Church. She's a devout Catholic, and she's fairly new at podcast interviews, and yet she is so passionate about what she's doing. So her passion will definitely override her inexperience. And not getting started. That's a big one. A lot of people, they do all this prep work and they never get started. Just get in there, start doing interviews. Some of the specifics of what you need to do in order to get interviews. You need to research target and relevant podcast shows. I'll give you some places that you can go to do the research, but you really want to do some research so that you know if it's a good fit. Like the person who approached me to be on my show, that the topic they wanted to speak on had nothing to do with what my show is about. And I just said, no, it's not a good fit. Are the shows current? You can find that out by doing a Google search to see when their last episode was up. In iTunes, there's a date listing of their most current episode. If it's more than a few months old, they're probably not current. My show was dormant, and it was not active for almost 5 years. And it's been probably in the last 2 weeks that we've been working really hard to get it back up and running. And it's been live for just a few days, and we're already getting a lot of good traction. But if somebody would have contacted me 2 months ago to be on my show, I would have told them no, because it wasn't active, nor at that time did I have any plan of making it active. Now, if they approach me, I want to make sure that it's a good fit for my audience. I want to make sure that they're going to be somebody that will be fun to interview, that they've got something of value to talk to my audience. So those are some of the specifics also. Do they have guests on their show? That's really important, because some people think, oh, I'll be that one exception to the rule that even though they don't have guests on their show, they're going to want me. No. It doesn't work like that. If they don't have guests, they don't have guests. How frequently do they air? The more frequently they air, the more traction they're going to get, and the more likely it is you'll have an opportunity. If they air once a month, that's only 12 guests a year that they're looking for. If they air once a week, that's 52 guests. If they air Monday through Friday, that's going to be 200 and, I don't know, I don't have the exact number, but I'd say about 250 opportunities that they have to fill time slots. Are they too big, or do you need to grow into them? And what I mean by that, it's great to have a vision of where you want to go. Like a lot of people, I'd love to be on the Ellen Show. I'd love to be on Oprah. In the plant-based eating industry, people say, I want to be on Rich Roll's show. In the entrepreneurial space, people say, I want to be on Lewis Howes' show. I mean, there's these really big shows. And the reality is you have to grow into those shows. If you've never done a podcast show and you think you're going to go right to the top, it might happen. And yet most of the time it's not. You have to be on a number of shows to get really good at what you do. And you never know who's listening to those other shows. I will tell you that the more shows you're on, the more opportunity seems to come out of the woodwork. So you want to really take that into consideration. Do you have your foundation in place? And what I mean by that is your website ready? Do you have some kind of an offer on your website? Is your blog up to date? Are your social media channels up to date? Are they all branded? Is there a consistent look and feel to what you're doing? What you need as you research, here's some of the things to consider. You need your show title. And what I always recommend is that you put a spreadsheet together. And in that spreadsheet, you want to have the following information: the show title, the genre of the show, the website, the name of the host's email, recent guests they've had on the show. And here's a little hack on why you want to know who the recent guests are. If there's a guest that you have a similar message as that guest, you can research what shows that guest has been on, and there's a really good chance that if they've been on other shows and you have a similar message, you contact the host and say, hey, I heard you interviewing Bob Merriweather, and I happen to speak on a similar topic as Bob, and I'd like to talk to you about being on your show. And oh, by the way, when I'm on shows, we actually do help promote the episode. I know how important that is to a host, so I just wanted you to know that. That short of a message out to a host that you're a good fit for probably will get some doors open for you. What's the date of the last episode? Again, that's very important, because if they're not a current show, why even approach them? Once you have things in place, research the right shows. So once you have all your foundation in place and you're ready to go, research the right shows. Book as many shows as possible in a short period of time. The reason being is that critical mass can do wonders for your market reach, your visibility, and your social standing in the world of podcasting. Have a plan in place for marketing the episodes. In other words, when you're on an episode, are you going to have some artwork done? Does the host provide you with artwork? Do they have a blog that you can promote with the permalink to the posting about your episode? Are you going to put it on your social media platforms like Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook? Where are you going to market the episode that you've been on? A well thought out process is going to reap you incredible benefits. And the more you plan things out, the better off you're going to be. Now, let's look at Hal Elrod, who, if you've not heard of Hal Elrod, I recommend you look him up. He did it the right way. And actually, one day when I was out on a run, I was listening to several different experts, because when I go on a run, I do a few miles. And so I listen to maybe a 15, 20-minute segment on either iTunes or YouTube. And this particular day, I was listening to Hal, and I was listening to Lisa Nichols, and I was listening to Tony Robbins. So I was listening to quite a few people. And it was a longer run. And one of the common denominators I heard from each of them was how when their most recent book came out, they did everything possible to get on as many podcast shows as possible. And it was kind of like a light bulb went on. I've been marketing for years, and yet I heard something that I've been telling my clients for a long, long time. Critical mass pays off beautifully. And Hal did it right, because what he did is he built a community, and he built his community with the Miracle Morning book. And he had a really substantial community. He had name recognition through repetition. So he was out there in a number of different locations being interviewed, posting on blogs, posting on social media. And maybe he has a team who does it, I don't know, but he was doing a lot of interviews. And that's where I first came across his material, was on YouTube. He had a vision of where he wanted to go, and he did something every single day to feed into that vision. And he kept at it. Now, his vision was originally, with the book Miracle Morning, he wanted to sell 1 million copies in a year. That was his vision. Well, like he says, a year turned into 5 or 6 years before he sold 1 million copies. But the thing that put him on the map was he didn't quit. A lot of people, after a year, he sold something like 10,000 copies, which is not bad. Actually, that's pretty darn good. And yet it was a far cry from 1 million copies. He just kept at it, did a lot of interviews. And after 5 or 6 years, he sold 1 million copies. So he had built his community based on a vision. And like he said, it just took longer than he anticipated. He adjusted the time frame to sell 1 million books. This was the book that he built his community with. And then when his next book came out, The Miracle Equation, so it was the Miracle Morning that he built his community with, he continued to build his community with the Miracle Equation. He had a very systemized process. And the process included lots and lots and lots of podcast interviews. And what he did is, as he was doing his interviews, he actually promoted the page, The Miracle Equation. On the page, if people pre-ordered the book, this was even before it came out, they would get $1,347 in bonuses. These were all his bonuses. It wasn't where he got a whole bunch of affiliate and joint venture partners together to promote all their bonuses. He actually, I'm sure, had affiliates promoting the book, the landing page. And what people would do is they would pre-order the book, they would come back, put in their order number into a landing page, and as a result, they would get a 6-week course that he was doing live. So it really worked well, because I actually bought his book specifically for the 6-week course. And I have to say, I really liked his book. I like his work. I like the way he writes. I like the way he thinks. I like the fact that he's overcome a lot of obstacles, and he just creates amazing, amazing outcomes. And what I have learned is, when you want a certain result, go find people who have gotten that result and figure out what they've done and model after them. And that's what his book, The Miracle Equation, is all about. And he got the visibility by being on lots of podcast shows. So some of your foundational aspects, some of the things that you want to look at: determine the types of shows that you're going to target. Really important that you have a clear vision of what types of shows. And it might be that you have several angles that you can go by and several hooks. Set up your website and your blog, your social media platforms, and a landing page for a book launch. Marketing materials such as your expert one sheet, your pitch sheet, your intro and questions, media outreach letter, all of that is what you need to prepare. Be very proactive, because one show is not going to make that much of a difference. One show a day could make an incredible difference, because you figure if you did one show a day, Monday through Friday, by the end of the year, you've got 250 shows under your belt. I can tell you, you get 250 shows under your belt and your name will be recognizable within your industry. Do as many shows as possible for a high concentration and lots of Google juice. And when you're on a show, send a copy of your book to the host ahead of time. I personally like to send a physical copy. And the reason being is I have a client, Lana Nelson, who wrote a book called The Food Codes. And she believes the same thing. And she's been on a lot of shows. She gets invited back a lot. Hosts interview her to other hosts. And she always sends out a signed copy to the host, especially stateside. Now, if they're in Europe, she may actually send them the Kindle version, but she makes sure that she gets her book in their hands. The reason being is when they're interviewing her, if they've read her book, they are really excited to be interviewing her because she's got a phenomenal strategy and system for intuitive eating. And it's all in her book. So by her sending them a physical copy, not only will they have a chance to read it, if it's being done by way of video, they can actually hold up the book and show the audience the book. And that is one more touch point for people to become familiar with your book. And big one is check your fear at the door. Don't worry about being perfect, because the reality is nobody is perfect. And if you try to be perfect, you usually make more mistakes and you come across as phony. The overused word of the day is authentic and authenticity, but reality is be authentic. Preparation of material. Your media request letter, your expert one sheet or your pitch sheet, your bio in various word counts, headshots or whatever kind of photos that you're going to use, book cover image, host this, put it all on your website on one page, on a media page, so that you can actually send a host right to that page or their support person, and they can download all that information. Finding opportunities. Some of the places that you find opportunities: iTunes, Blog Talk Radio, Google search, just put in the type of show you're looking for, and then podcast show. Like if it's dog training plus podcast shows, and a lot will come up. Find authors in your space and see what shows they've been on. A nice platform is Poddit.net. That's Poddit.net. It's a great community of people that are looking for opportunities, hosts that are looking for guests. So go check it out, Poddit.net. Now, the number one challenge is having a process to follow. I've given you a lot of information for you to consider and implement, but I've got a couple of resources that will help you even further. First of all, follow the process in the directory of resources for podcast show listings. In the first part of the book, there's a lot of great information on how to find opportunities, how to get organized, and then there's over 500 listings in the directory that are active listings. So go in there and use that resource. Use the bonus training material. Really valuable information. And then if you need more help, let's go ahead and talk. I have an opportunity right now where you can schedule a 30-minute one-on-one coaching call with me. There's a small fee to that. It's powerupforprofits.com/fast track. powerupforprofits.com/fast track. I look forward to talking with you. And I encourage you, go out, look for lots of opportunity, create your opportunity, because if you don't create it, nobody else is going to. This is Kathleen Gage, encouraging you, visit my podcast show. I'm going to actually show you my podcast show, and sign up, subscribe, and listen to the episodes. So we're on iTunes, and what you'll find on iTunes, there are new and noteworthy shows. These are some of the newer shows that are getting a lot of traction. That's a great way to find opportunities. In the upper right-hand corner, this is where you actually would key in the type of show you're looking for. And in my case, let's go ahead and take a look at my show. This show we just recently put back up. And as you'll see, I've got a lot of episodes. These are previous episodes. But I want you to notice that right here, where it says released, this is how frequently you can see how frequently shows are loaded up. But you'll also notice in 2015, there was a huge gap between then and 2018, and I only did 2 episodes in 2018, and took a break again, started it up in 2020. I just recently started it. The show is going to be very, very active. I'm already getting a lot of downloads, but what I encourage you to do is you can click over here to get the show link and then listen to an episode 2, 3, or 4. I would encourage you to subscribe and then give me a ranking. It's a 1 to 5 star, and I do appreciate 5-star reviews, but I've got a lot of great interviews on here, and one of the things you're going to notice is the sound quality now is so much better than when I first started. I did not pay that much attention to the sound quality, and I would encourage you to really look at your own sound quality, whether you be a host or a guest. It's really important that you have good sound equipment. You want a microphone, an external microphone, headset, earbuds work fine. You can plug them into, if you have mini speakers, you can plug them into that. You want to make sure you have no distractions, no outside noise. I was watching a YouTube video listening to a YouTube video while I was running the other day, and I actually heard something that shocked me. It literally shocked me because I've listened to hundreds of interviews. And this was the first time ever that I heard a featured expert who is pretty much a rock star in what they do. They were being interviewed and their phone dinged while they were doing the interview, and they were actually texting while they're doing the interview to somebody else and saying, "Oh, I've been waiting for this. This is so important." It wasn't an emergency. It was just rude. And so when you're on a show, put all your distractions aside, give the host 100% of your attention, go out there, share your message, and just be the rock star that you're meant to be. So I encourage you, check out my podcast show, and I occasionally look for guests to have on my show. I look for bona fide experts who have a very important message to share and who are going to be willing to help me promote their episode. This is Kathleen Gage saying have a great day and thank you for being on this training.